Welcome to Wednesday's edition of Renew Plus. I'm Pastor Tony. Thank you for joining us here at the midweek of week number 8 of our series, Walk It Out. Last week we started this, and then this week we're really right in the middle of this. We're learning that we can walk in love. And again, when we talk about walk, that means you have to learn how to do this. Walking means you have to learn how to balance this. You have to learn how to make a step in front of the other. Now, this kind of walk becomes more natural the more we do it. Just like when you're learning to walk naturally, or you had kids, you probably don't remember when you learned to walk, but maybe if you've been around kids and they're learning how to walk, they really have to think about it, and they're a little uneasy on their feet at the beginning, but then pretty soon they get a handle of that, they get confident in it, and pretty soon they're naturally walking. And that's the way this is as well. That's why it's called a walk of love, walking in love, because we have to learn how to do this. And, we're not just going to be perfect in it overnight, but the more we do it, the more proficient we will be at it. The more we practice, the more perfect we will become in it. I don't know if we'll ever reach that perfection in this love walk in this life, but I think we can be more perfect. We can at least become proficient at it. So let's go back over to 1 Corinthians 13. That again, 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8. I'm reading out of the Amplified Version here just to bring out some of the meaning of this so that we understand it better, can get a better handle on it. But, this is really a description of God Himself. This is the God kind of love. This isn't God just pointing His finger and said, all right, everybody, you live this way, and then He lives another way. No, this is His way of life. And He intended and really created all of us to live this way, to receive this kind of love from Him, and to walk in this love toward other people. That's what's going to preserve our relationships. Yes, we all of us involved in relationships have imperfections and faults of our own. And if we're out fault finding and really with other people, and we're always finger pointing at somebody else and really basing our love for them on their performance or their perfection or their lack of faults, we're always going to have problems. But when you learn to walk in this kind of love and grace right here that we're talking about, this is the way God looks at us. He knows our faults, He knows our imperfections, but He still loves us, and He still treats us with this kind of kindness, regardless of whether you deserve or earn it or not. And that's the kind of love that we're supposed to give to somebody else. So 1 Corinthians 13 in the Amplified, let's just read 4 and 5 again. We left off at the end of 5, but just review. Let's just read through 4 and 5, and then we'll go to 6. It says in verse 4, love endures long and is patient and kind. Love never is envious nor boils over with jealousy, is not boastful or vainglorious, does not display itself haughtily. Verse 5 it says, it is not conceited, arrogant, and inflated with pride. It is not rude, unmannerly, and does not act unbecomingly. Love, God's love in us, does not insist on its own rights or its own way, for it is not self-seeking. It is not touchy or fretful or resentful. It takes no account of the evil done to it. It pays no attention to a suffered wrong. Now, as a pastor, I've done a lot of counseling. So much of it is involved around relationships, particularly marriages. And, I put a lot of stock. Anybody that I'm going to perform or officiate a wedding ceremony for, I want to make sure they've gone through premarital counseling. Because, a lot of people, they just go into marriage thinking, everything's going to be just like, our courtship here. Well, the problem is you start living with that person and you find out their faults and imperfections, and after a while, if you're not walking in this kind of love, you'll start getting on the other side. And one of the exercises I give people in premarital counseling is I want you to list for me at least 10 things of things you really like about this person. Well, that's not hard, but they'll list 50. But then I say, all right, I want you to list 10 things that you think is maybe a weakness in that other person that you don't really care for. Whether it's right or wrong, you don't care for it. Well, they struggle and they look at each other, those puppy dog eyes at each other, and they think, well, I can't think of one thing that's wrong with you or weakness in you. And then, you go 6 months or a year down the road after they get married. And if you haven't done this already, if you haven't already prepared them for this, like I do in premarital counseling, they'll come back and you'll give them the same exercise, and all of a sudden it's reversed. They have a hard time finding anything good about that person. And then, they're listing 50 things that's wrong that they think's a weakness in that person. Well, did that person really change that much? No. You just began to see them the way they really were, not that puppy dog love or whatever it is, but all of a sudden you begin to see them, and their faults and imperfections. And if you're not really walking in the God kind of love, you're going to begin to emphasize and put the spotlight on people's failures and their imperfections more than yours. Well, let me tell you something. Let's put that same spotlight that you're putting on somebody else. Let's turn that around and put it on you for a few minutes. Let's go find out what's wrong with you. Well, you'll turn that thing off. I can tell you pretty quick. All of us have imperfections and faults, and we all fail. But that should not be our security in our relationship, whether we walk in perfection or not. Our security should be in God's love for us, and that same love turn outward, right there. See, that's what's going to cause a happy marriage and a happy home. Now, you can't control everybody in the world. You can't control everything that's going on in the world, but you can control the things that are in your environment and in your atmosphere and in you. And you can make a decision, this is the way you're going to live, and particularly husbands and fathers, heads of households, whatever. And really, a husband and wife should be cooperating together in this, okay? You can make a decision right up front. This is what I want for every married couple before they enter into marriage. You're going to walk according to this right here. According to 1 Corinthians 13. This will keep those problems out. Yes, you'll have potential problems. You'll have situations come. You're going to have times where you're going to butt heads. I can tell you. That is just the way we are, okay? We're going to have disagreements. But we don't have to let those disagreements turn into strife and division and contention in the household and begin to rob and steal the peace out of that household. You can walk in a way that, sometimes we just don't see things the same way. We have to understand that. That doesn't mean that either person is right. It's probably in the middle somewhere. And we need to be able to I like what my wife says, and she's involved in the premarital counseling with me, and we've endeavored to live this way. I've always heard, and she uses this phrase, and it's great, that, that we always heard traditionally that marriage is a give and take. But actually, that's not what marriage is give and take. It's give and receive. We never take something from somebody else. We don't make demands on somebody else. See, if we're going into a relationship making demands out of that, that means that you're not receiving God's love and grace and what His supply can bring through that love and grace. And now you're looking to somebody else to fulfill a need in your life that really only God can. If you're not happy in of yourself and in your relationship with God before you get into a marriage, you're not going to be happy when you get into that marriage. It's not going to work. So it's always a give and receive. In other words, if I'm not self-focused, if I am more focused on giving than taking, then you know what? And we have two people involved in that are both more involved and absorbed in giving love and giving to somebody else and serving the other people rather than being served and taking from that person, then you're going to have every need met in that household automatically, by default. You're going to be receiving because you're both involved in giving. And it gets you involved in the right attitude that this God kind of love is always about giving and not about taking. All right, so let's go on down to verse 6. It said, "It is not rejoice at injustice and unrighteousness, but rejoices when right and truth prevail." I want you to see that right there. It rejoices, it does not rejoice at injustice and unrighteousness, but rejoices when right and truth prevail. Notice verse 7, "Love bears up under anything and everything that comes, is ever ready to believe the best of every person. In other words, every person ought to be innocent until proven guilty in your eyes. You shouldn't have, that cynical point of view that you're always looking at every person thinking, they're always out for the wrong. No, that should not be the case. It should be that we're always ready to believe the best of every person. You know what that does away with? It does away with the gossip, train. It does away with the rumor mill, so to speak. See, gossip would stop if we started exercising the God kind of love and believing the best of every person. If you hear something about somebody else, you don't know if that's true or not, then you can end that gossip train right there. You can end that rumor mill right there, as far as your concern goes. You wouldn't want that coming around about you. You wouldn't want somebody believing the wrong about you, then that's not right. If people knew you, that you would know that they would judge you differently. Well, that's the way that goes right there. The gossip train is always somebody trying to get something on somebody else. They think that if they get something on somebody else, that's going to make them look better. It kind of takes the spotlight off of them and their faults and failures and puts it on somebody else. I like something a great minister once said, actually his brother Hagin. They approached him about another minister who had fallen in immorality. And first of all, he just said, I'm not going to comment on that. He was holding meetings. He said they didn't care before this happened. They weren't giving us any publicity, but all of a sudden, they all show up. They wanted to know what my opinion was. You know what they wanted? They wanted him to gossip about this other brother. He had fallen into sin. But that shouldn't, those who are, the Bible says in Galatians 6, those who are mature should restore those who have fallen. Not those who are immature in this. But Brother Hagin made this statement. It just stayed with me and just stuck with me. He said, lighting up or putting out another man's candle is never going to brighten yours. Boy, I tell you, that is so rich right there. That is really what we're talking about. You putting out another man's candle, another person's candle, by gossip and by rumors and by judging that person, even if they've done that, you're putting their candle out is not going to make your candle brighter. No, not at all. Why? Because that's not, their performance is not basing my security and happiness, whether it's good or bad. So notice it says it's ever ready to believe the best of every person. Its hopes are fadeless under all circumstances, and it endures everything without weakening. Now, let me just stop right there. Let me just insert something, because I've had a number of counseling sessions along this line as well, where particularly a wife was involved in an abusive relationship with her husband. And so much of the time, that husband either wasn't born again, he didn't have the love nature, or he just didn't understand the God kind of love. But let me say this: when you cross over that line and you start putting the wife down all the time, either verbally, just constantly abusing her verbally, and particularly when you've crossed over that line of physical abuse, this should not be a manipulation for that wife to stay in that physically abusive situation and just keep getting beat over and over again. Now let me tell you something. This right here is not for that. That husband is out of line. He has created an imbalance in that home. And at this point, this wife should at least physically leave that situation in that household and go find shelter somewhere else. I just know from talking about this and talking to others that sometimes other counselors have used these things right here to say you need to stay in that physically abusive situation. That's not what this is saying right here at all. No, if you're physically abused and threatened, you need to get out until that person repents, and you can maybe go through counseling, and that person maybe gets born again. Normally, that person that's doing that is not legitimately born again. We have to question the authenticity of their salvation experience, because the love of God would never do that to their wife, I can tell you. Just a little side note there. All right, so notice in verse number 8, the very beginning of verse number 8, it says, love never fails. It never fades out or becomes obsolete or comes to an end. Notice this, that the love of God never fails. It never fades out or becomes obsolete or comes to an end. See, that is such a great description right there. And again, marital counseling, because this is magnified in a marriage situation, because you have two people that are imperfect, that have their own faults, coming together, and they're trying to form a marriage union and living under the same roof. So you have to deal with this more so in a marriage relationship than maybe just a relationship among friends. You know, they're not just, they can kind of get away from things, but you don't get away from those things when you're involved in a marriage situation. But I've always found out that in premarital counseling and postmarital counseling, if they're having trouble, if we can get people to begin to do this right here, first of all, get them born again. You're not going to be able to do this without the love nature on the inside of you. And you're not going to have the love nature on the inside of you without being born again and born of God. First thing, first and foremost, that's why it's so important both parties be born again, be believers. But once that happens, we start renewing our minds with this right here. We have the capability and the capacity of walking in this kind of love now, because we're born of love Himself. This is our description as well of our nature. So when we begin to do this and practice this, and I tell people to go in there and put their name where it says love, you know, over and over again it says love endures long. You put your own personal identity in there and you said, I endure long, and I am patient and kind. I am never envious. I never boil over with jealousy. I'm not boastful or vainglorious. I do not display it myself haughtily. I'm not conceited and arrogant, inflated with pride. Because that is you. That is your identification now. And the more you begin to renew your mind to this new identity, this new nature on the inside of you, and begin to walk this out, those marriage problems go away. Because I can tell you, marriage problems, relationship problems in general, are all because of self-centeredness, self-seeking, self-preservation, love for self more than love for somebody else, taking, demanding rather than giving, and sowing and receiving in a relationship. Those are always going to present themselves problems. We read over in James chapter 3 yesterday. So that's important we do that. Now let's go over to Ephesians 5. I'm almost out of time, but I want to head back over to Ephesians 5 again today and kind of be back in Ephesians a large part for the rest of the week, at least to some degree, as we have been. But here in Ephesians chapter 5, we read this last week, but now we're getting back to this. Verse number 1, it says, therefore be imitators of God as dear children. Now why can I imitate God? Now what is imitation? It's acting like somebody else. It's mimicking the way they act. Now, how can we do this? Because we have God's nature on the inside of us. That's why it says imitate or act this way, mimic God as dear children. Why? Because we have the same nature that our Heavenly Father has. We are children and offspring of Him. We can walk in that manner. So it says, be imitators of God and dear children. In verse number 2 it says, and walk in love. Well, we just described that in detail. 1 Corinthians 13. We described Monday and Tuesday, yesterday and Monday, what love is not. So if you're walking and acting the way that we described earlier in the week, you're not imitating God. If you're acting according to 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8, you are imitating God. And it says, and walk in love as Christ also loved us and has given Himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma. Now notice right there that when he emphasizes when we're walking in love, he's emphasizing the fact that we're walking as Christ loved us and has given Himself for us. I'm going to pick up there tomorrow because I'm out of time. Join us again tomorrow as we pick up from here. If you'd like additional materials and resources, go to tonycowan.org and we will see you